but here's a Celia Trusted Advisor. Let's go for the first chapter of the DP600, Security and Governance in Microsoft Fabric. We will learn basically about the 4 layers of security in Microsoft Fabric. You have 4 layers. So the first layer is like the workspace layer. The second layer that you have is the item layer. The third layer you have is data. You have data security, and you have the compliance layer. And all these work together. They are not really layered. So they are connected to each other, and that makes things from time to time a little bit complicated. We have different aspects on that, and we will go through that. So let's start. Great to have you here. So let's go a little bit into detail. So first of all, we have the layer 1, which is workspace. In Fabric, you have workspaces. Workspaces works like folders, or a little bit more like drives maybe, or when you are SharePoint aware, these are like site connections. So it's a boundary for security. It's a boundary for all items that you create. It's like the top level boundary. There's nothing really above a workspace. You have options to group workspaces into domains. These domains are from a technical point of view not above a workspace. So for example, you could not create a lakehouse in a domain. A lakehouse has always to be in a workspace. So layer 1 is workspace. In the workspace level or layer, you have different aspects for security and governance. First one is an aspect for governance. This is domain assignment. Domain assignment. You can assign a workspace. You don't have to. You can assign a workspace to a domain. The idea comes from the data mesh concept. So let's make a short introduction to data mesh. The idea in data mesh is you have a variety of data sources. You have a variety of departments or whatever, where you have in each department a lot of different data sources. And all these data sources come together in something called a lake. As you can imagine, this lake in Fabric is the one lake. Now, the question is how to create a proper data model out of these different sources. The old approach would be just create one big data warehouse, DWH, and create one big fantastic data model. Problem with that, when you have a change in one of these items, let's say here, then this change, schema change, not a data change, schema change, new column for example, is propagated and moved into the data warehouse. So you have a schema change on the data warehouse, and since you have a bunch of reports sitting on top of that, you are most likely in trouble. The idea of the data mesh concept is that you have data owners. For example, let's say this is one department, the department 1. So you would have 1 or 2, most probably 2 different data owners for each data source. And then you put the data in the lake, yes, but in that lake, this data is owned by the data owner. Let's say owner 1 of department 1. Right? So this, I will draw the red line, this data then goes into that thing, and that thing is the workspace in Fabric. And in that workspace, the data is curated from raw, bronze layer, to silver, to gold. And in gold, you have like a data product. And this data product then is exposed via stable APIs like GraphQL or something else. Could be shortcuts, whatever. Let's stay with GraphQL because it's REST. It's easy to imagine that it's kind of a stable interface, right? So you have properties and so on in GraphQL, and these properties are aligned to the gold layer. And now when you have a schema change that is propagated, then this is propagated to the raw layer, and you can then fix this column in the silver layer, so the gold layer stays the same. It might happen that you have breaking changes, but still then you have versionized interfaces, versionized APIs, so if it's version 1 or version 1.1, and you can deliver both interfaces at the same time. There might be rare situations where you have a big bang change and you cannot do anything, but beside of that, you have reliable interfaces, and everybody else is doing exactly the same, and then the story continues behind the stable interfaces. This is basically the idea of data mesh in a nutshell, right? And because then you have multiple data sources for the same department or whatever your company structure is about, you need some way to group these. And these are domains. So domains are for grouping of workspaces. They are important from a governance point of view, because then you know, okay, these 2 workspaces or these 100 workspaces are co-located in the same division or department or whatever. At the workspace level, you have as a second layer the workspace roles. The roles are, well, the people or the roles of the people. So you have an owner, you have contributor, you have read-only access, whatever. You have an administrator, you have viewers, and so on. So of course, you will try to keep it as simple as possible, and with the concept of least privilege. So you will give only read access if possible, or contribute for the people who need to change data. This is about the workspace. This is not about the API. So you could have, or you most probably will have, different permissions in the API, in the where you give data out, than inside of the workspace. So not everybody who has access to the API will have access to your workspace. And then you have some one-leg settings. That you can configure also in that workspace layer. So this is a workspace layer that you have as layer 1 in your governance and security concept of Microsoft Fabric. Layer 2 is the item layer. Layer 2 is item. In item, we have also different aspects. The first one is sensitivity labels. The idea of sensitivity labels is that you assign sensitivity components or sensitivity descriptions to data, and this is propagated throughout the whole data stack. So you assign it as a source, and it's still valid in the reports. When you say this is confidential data, then the confidentiality label is still present in the report, and you can derive actions or consequences out of that label. So the label is present, and you can then define what that means. So for example, only a specific group is allowed to see that data or whatever. As a second, this is, by the way, related to purview. So let's write that here, purview. Right. The second thing that you have are endorsements. So you can endorse data, which means you have a bunch of data sources. You might end up with multiple data sources claiming to deliver the same content. It could happen that you have 2 KPIs that have the same name but different values, so you don't know. This is the idea of endorsements. And with endorsements, you can promote data. You can certify data, and you can define master data. This is the idea of endorsements. And the next one, or maybe the most important one, is about, and let's put that on the left side, it's about item permissions. Oh, that's not looking nice after AI is applied. So let's try permissions. Permission. Now it looks better, but item still looks weird. Item permissions. So item permissions are pretty simple. You have it in a lot of different computer-related things, right? It means you can read, you can write, you can change the data, you have admin privileges, and so on. So this is directly related to the workspace roles. Well, a workspace role has item permissions on items in Microsoft Fabric. So this is layer 2. It's about items. You have layer 3. Layer 3 is like the data model or at the data level. So layer 3 is about data. In data, you have different governance and security layers. The most famous one, most probably, is row level security. Row level security means that you can define where queries, so restrictions, so where country is Switzerland equals Switzerland or something like that. And you can assign roles to that. So everybody that is in the Switzerland group has the ability to see Swiss data, something like that. And you define that with where clauses. It's very simple, very straightforward. These are DAX filters. It's not SQL, but it's DAX, but it's okay. And the second thing that you have is object level security, OLS. This is, well, you can hide tables, you can hide columns based on permissions, right? And then you have one leg security. That has the same abbreviation. So let's say one leg security. That's not nice. It's not nice. Security. That's better. So one leg security is quite new. That means you give all the permissions not on the endpoint. Before, you had to give all the permissions on the SQL endpoint, on the semantic model, and so on. Now you can define everything directly in one leg. RLS plus column level security. You can define both in one leg security, which makes things much simpler in some way because it's clearer. But for very complex things, for example, if you have a lot of aggregations between raw, silver, and gold, things are not so helpful defining it right on the first layer, right? Then you need different permissions, or you will end up with different permissions. But in the end, it's like a mixture. So as you can imagine, this is also related to people or to workspace roles or in generator roles. So we can simply draw 3 lines to our 3 different security implementations or security aspects in one leg. And the one leg security is, of course, directly related to one leg settings. So let's draw it that way too. So you see things are connecting a little bit. And last but not least, you have layer 4. Layer 4 is compliance. Compliance has some aspects that are really important. The first one is, I think, audit logs. So you need somehow to be able to track user activities. That's a very common request. Who can see my data? Who has accessed my data? The first one is even more important. If you could access the data, you can access the data, right? So audit logs are a very important part of compliance. And of course, audit logs are again directly related to identities, which means that we can draw the line from our workspace roles through the different security concepts to the audit logs, right? Because once someone has access, you can audit whether this access is used or not. You have 2 other aspects. So you have in the Purview Hub the capability of protection metrics. Protection metric. This is related, this is basically like numbers about everything that you assigned on the item level, sensitivity, and endorsement layer. So let's draw a line from here. So all the statistics, all the numbers, all the overview is described in the protection metric layer. And last but not least, in compliance, you also have the dependencies and the view which item depends on what, the so-called lineage. This is also part of our compliance. So these are the 4 layers of Fabric or one-leg security. You see it's pretty one-leg related, but in the end it's of course part of the whole Fabric layer, right? So let's go a little bit more into detail. So we can have a quick look, or a deeper look, to be honest, into row-level security, right? How does it work? Row-level security. Let's go a little bit more inside that. First, how is it defined in the end? You have the data analyst. Data analyst. The data analyst is defining the star schema. The data schema, right? And it's also defining the different roles based on the requirements. Roles. And these two are then connected with the proper DAX queries. So the result is row-level security. So in row-level security, the criteria on the star schema are combined with different roles. So for example, region equals West, and salesperson, or let's say or salesperson equals username, which means that either the region is West or the username, the name of the user is the salesperson. So this person then could see everything in West, assuming that the person is working in sales region West, and could see everything that is related to himself. So this is of course or, because he can see both, but from a consummation perspective, this is an and, because you see both, right? And of course then you test that, and as a data analyst, and you see, okay, it works, right? This is defined in Power BI then. Power BI. There's the definition made. And then the semantic model, which brings everything together, right, is published. That's like that. And this semantic model is published to the Power BI service of Fabric. And there, this security then is enforced, which means when the user logs in, so you have the business user here, business user, and the business user is opening the report, then these conditions are enforced, which means the username, that's not nice. Anyway, I think it will not work. Username is transmitted to the Power BI service and is checked against the username requirement, and the region is also compared, because there is some group assignments that, for example, relates to the region West. The admin and security team, right? Security sec team is assigning these roles, these groups, to users, And the groups then are reflected in the row level security. So there is no need to define the exact users, or you shouldn't do that, of course. You can, but you shouldn't write in the DAX queries. But instead of that, you will rely on group membership. The group membership is defined by the security administration. So this is how it basically works. Well, now you have different roles in your workspaces. I mentioned that briefly in the introduction, in the 4 levels, and we should also take a better or a more in-depth look on that roles, right? So workspace, space, roles. There we go. Workspace roles. That's okay. Let's make it a little bit larger. So the workspace roles. You have different roles. You have, first of all, the admin role. Admin. Admin means you have full control. You can do everything, right? You can read everything, you can write everything, and you can give permissions. That's quite important. So that's part of your journey. You can do everything in one workspace. This is why you usually want to keep the admin role limited, of course, because, well, I think it's quite obvious. Next, you have the member. The member role means you can create everything. But you remember you have also the contributor role. The contributor role can also create everything. So there's a common question, what's the difference between member and contributor and workspace roles? The answer is the member can also share. Right? So the member can share the data, and the contributor can only create. So you might ask then, okay, if the member can share, what's the difference to the admin? The admin difference is the admin has also access to the workspace settings. This is prohibited from the member. And then last but not least, you have the viewer. And there the name is like program. It can read everything, and that's it. Right? So this is like an overview about the workspace roles. And we also talked about the sensitivity labels. So let's go a little bit deeper in that idea too. Sensitivity labels are assigned at the source. Let's assume our source is something like SQL or ADLS v2 or something like that. Let's say it's in SQL database. At the SQL database, you assign a label called confidential. Well, what's happening? You ingest this data into a lakehouse. Ingest. The label is also applied on the lakehouse. So still there is label confidential, which is quite important. That's the idea, right? Next, you create out of that lakehouse a semantic model. Still, the label is maintained and your data is labeled as confidential. Next, you create a report. As you can guess, the label is still propagated. Your data is still confidential. So, well, now how things get interesting. The user tries to export this report, right? Let's say to Excel or to PDF or download the PBIX file, whatever. So, first question is, now we need to cross a little bit, I think. First question is, let's make a U-turn. Question, is this allowed by policy? By policy. If yes, then the export is done, but the label encryption, the label is still there, and it is encrypted. For example, it depends on your policy, of course. If not, it's quite obvious, then the export is denied. So let's say you pass your exported data to an external user, right? And the external user tries to open this file. What happens? Question is, has this external user permissions in the label policy? You remember we defined a policy here, and the question is, does the user have permissions in that policy? If yes, you can guess it. The user can open the file, the report, the exported report. If not, the user cannot open the report, respectively, the authentication of a user that has permission would be required. That's the idea of labels, and I think you get the idea that everything is propagated throughout the whole stack, and that's a fascinating thing, right? So it's going until the very end, everything is well defined and well protected. And that's really cool. So there is a definitive business case and sensitivity labels for data that you want to protect or need to protect. So let's have like next view on the decision tree, which security layer to take. So let's have a look on the decision tree, when to take which kind of security layer. So first question is, you have a requirement, the security requirement, of course. The first question is, do you control access by by identity? So do you need to check the user identity? That's the first question. If yes, or if no. So let's go with the no area, right? When you say, okay, we don't need to check the user's identity, and we talking about the entire workspace, right? Then you simply assign one of these roles, admin, contributor, member, or visitor, right? So that's very simple. If you don't need to rely on the user's identity and you want to share a specific item, you can share this item directly, whether you when you have admin or contributor role. You can give read access on that item. You can give write access on this item, or you can even bypass the workspace roles. If you need to control access by identity, Then next question is how to select the proper method to give access. And the question is a little bit more complicated because the first question is about the requirement when you want to share data. Data. Important part is data. Do you need to share data based on user identity? If no, so if you don't need to cut off parts of the data based on user identity, then the question is only the scope, right? When you want to share the whole workspace, then you have the 4 roles: admin, member, contributor, reader. And you simply assign one of these 4 roles. When you need to share an individual item, you can share that item directly, so you can give permissions directly on that item. Right? I think about Power BI reports there, this is quite common. Or you can give direct permissions on that item, right? Read, write permissions, whatever. So this is when when you don't need to. I didn't write no. Let's write no, and this is yes. So when you need to take the user's identity into account regarding the data, what are your options? So next question then is granularity. Do you need to define it on a row level? Then you need, excuse me. There we go. Row level. Then you need row level security. That's a DAX filter. When you need to do it on a table or column, then object level security or column level security is the way to go. When you need to do it based on files or folders, then one lake security is the way to go, right? You can define based on tables in the lakehouse, the one lake security. You can define it on files or folders in one lake, and you can define pass-through or delegated authentication, and you have the shortcut topic, right? So that's basically the idea, how you could a little bit go through this jungle of different options, how to share something or not. Let's go a little bit in the topic of performance optimization regarding row level security. As you can imagine, row level security can have an impact on performance. So let's say you have a region table with 10 rows, region, right? Dim region with 10 rows, right? Then you apply an RLS filter, and the result is that you have 1 row left. You have a relationship to fact sales, which has 1 million rows, right? The filter is then propagated to that fact table, and the result is you have, let's say, 100k rows. So this is fast, right? So what you should avoid is the opposite. Let's say you start with fact sales, and you apply the RLS filter here, and you have 100k lines filtered, then of course your report is slow because you compare, you apply the filter to 10 rows versus 1 million rows, and the result is 10% in both scenarios, but 10% of 1 million means you need 90%, 900,000 rows needs to be filtered out. This makes things really, really slow. So let's go a little bit through the shortcut security. Shortcut security means, so basically shortcuts means your data is stored in one place, shortcut. Shortcut means your data is stored in Workspace 1, data, and you shortcut that data to Workspace 2 without copying it. So you can access the data and as if it is in Workspace 2, but it isn't. It's just shortcutted. That's the idea of shortcutting. Let's put that away and let's start with the question of shortcutting. Okay, there we go. So let's start with the business user, which is always a good idea. Business user accesses data, right? That's a common case in Microsoft Fabric. So let's say we are in a workspace and we have a shortcut in our lakehouse. Let's say that's a dev lakehouse, points to the target, right? Okay, so first question is, which type of shortcut is it? Is it an internal shortcut, one lake to one lake, right? Then you have the opportunity of a pass through identity. So you can pass through user's identity, right? When you have the type of external, like S3, like something else, then you need to use a delegated identity, right? So you have connection credentials that need to be used. So next thing is you have a target of that shortcut. Let's say your target lakehouse, target. The target is production data, right? So, and on the shortcut, you have different permissions. Let's go. Let's take yellow. So shortcut path permission, shortcut permission is write. So user has write on the shortcut. The target permission of the shortcut is user has read all. So now there is a permission evaluation happening, right? Very simple, most restrictive permission applies, right? Which means effective permission, we have read all versus write all equals read all is the winner because it's the most restrictive one. So user can read, user cannot write. So again, we have the shortcut from the dev lakehouse to the target, right? So we want to mirror the target data in the dev lakehouse. In def lakehouse, we have write. In target, we have read. Then the most restrictive permission applies. That makes sense, and that's pretty obvious, I think. Okay, so last but not least, let's go a little bit deeper into the permissions in one workspace. We already talked about the workspace roles. You remember we have admin, member, contributor, and viewer. And we have different capabilities. One capability is manage workspace. This is related to administrator. We have create or edit items. This is of course related to administrator, but it is also related to a member and a contributor. So all three can create or edit items. Next, we have publish reports. Of course, an administrator can publish reports, and a member can publish reports. But a contributor cannot publish reports. And last but not least, we have view, and of course, everybody can view. So let's sum up this a little bit. There are some traps and some things that are really worth to know. So first, we have the 4 security layers. We have the workspace roles, we have the item permissions, we have the data security, and we have the compliance, as we have talked about. Then you have some exam critical facts that you need to know. First of all, row level security is only relevant for reading data. This is so obvious that from time to time you will see that you forget that. But row level security is only important for reading stuff, right? Object level security hides everything, not only data, but also metadata. So for example, a column name, it is simply not visible. Only authorized reviewers can view certified items, and shortcuts require permissions on both ends, right? Most restrictive applies. Remember the read and write that we just have discussed. Regarding the decision framework, the question is always who accesses the workspace? Who do you need to control, right? This is done by workspace roles. Whether you need to share a specific item, this is done by item permissions. When you need to filter rows by user, this is done by row level security. When you need to hide tables or columns, this is done by object level security. Whether you need to classify or protect something, this is done by sensitivity labels. And when you need to establish a trust, this is done by endorsements. Some typical questions that arise online or offline in classes or on forums and so on. So, do I need to memorize text filters for RLS? So, no, you don't need to write code. You need to select code. So, you should be able to understand the code, of course, but there is no need to write the code. Is one-leg security already in the exam or not? Please check the so-called objective domain. One-leg security is pretty new. At some point it will be in the exam, and then it's mentioned in the exam outline, which is called the objective domain. How much of the exam is about security? According to the objective domain, it's about 25 to 30% of the exam is somehow related to security. Thanks for attending. I wish you thanks for attending. I'm very pleased that you have. Thanks for attending. See you next time.